It was 7:10 in the morning when everything came to a head. I stood in my son's kitchen, my hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what I knew was about to happen. Mark had positioned himself in front of the doorway like a guard, and Brooke hovered near the phone as if ready to make a call I would never want to hear. They thought they had me cornered, that I was powerless and too old to resist. But what they didn't realize was that every word, every gesture, every threat had already been captured, hidden in plain sight. A small camera inside a decorative bowl was recording their final attempt to strip me of my dignity. I remember feeling an odd calmness settle over me, as though my heartbeat aligned with a truth I had been waiting to reveal. For weeks, I had played the part they expected an aging mother too slow to notice, too trusting to fight back. I let them underestimate me, and I let them believe I was trapped. But I wasn't. I was documenting. I was building proof, and I was ready for the moment when their cruelty would finally expose itself in full. I share this story not because I enjoy reliving it, but because I know too many people sit in kitchens like mine, surrounded by family, but feeling completely alone. Have you ever felt that sharp twist in your chest when you realize someone you love sees you as a burden? That was my morning that day. To understand how I came to stand there, steady in the face of betrayal, we need to step back months earlier when I still believed that moving in with my son was an act of love and trust. My name is Eleanor Parker, and at 72, I never imagined I would be starting over. When my husband Henry passed, the house we had built together in Boise felt unbearably quiet. Every corner reminded me of his chair by the window, the smell of his pipe tobacco, even the way the floor creaked when he walked down the hall. Grief was heavy, and silence only made it heavier. So when my son Mark and his wife Brooke suggested I move in, I thought it was the loving choice. I told myself it would help me heal, and in return, I could be there for them. I paid $800 a month toward expenses and took on the things they couldn't always manage: meals, laundry, after-school pickups. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I was the one driving Lily to her violin lessons, and in the evenings, I helped Noah with his part-time schedule so he could save for college. Those little routines gave me purpose. On the surface, everything looked like family. Mark smiled through the stress of running a struggling car lot. Brooke carried herself with polished confidence, working in pharmaceutical sales, always perfectly put together. I thought it was admirable. But underneath, cracks were forming. I just didn't see them yet. The grandkids, though, they were my anchor. Noah was 16, working harder than a boy his age should, and Lily at 13 had a tenderness that reminded me I still mattered. She often asked if I was tired or if I wanted company. Those small questions meant the world to me. Back then, I believed we were one another's support system. I truly thought I had found safety. But one sleepless night around 12:40 a.m., standing in the hallway for a glass of water, I overheard something that shattered that illusion. And that was when my story began to change. That night, around 12:40 a.m., as I passed the hallway with a glass of water in my hand, I heard voices. They were hushed, but sharp enough to slice through the quiet. I stood there frozen, realizing for the first time that I wasn't being seen as a mother or a partner in their home. I was being weighed like an expense. The words stung: the cost of groceries, the utilities, the inconvenience of me simply existing under their roof. It was as if my life had been reduced to a set of numbers they couldn't balance. After that night, I began noticing things I had brushed aside before. Brooke's way of calculating every portion of food I ate, or the sigh in her tone when I asked for small things. Mark avoided me more and more, letting her carry the role of the polite caretaker. Though even that politeness felt thin. I could feel the shift in their eyes, as though I wasn't family, but an obstacle. One afternoon, I walked past Mark's desk and saw a stack of papers left open. It wasn't carelessness, it was desperation. Overdue notices, late mortgage payments, and credit card debt that had climbed to $47,000. Their finances weren't just strained, they were drowning. And I realized something crucial. It wasn't me they resented. It was the pressure of their own mistakes. I had simply become the easiest target. That discovery lit a quiet spark inside me. If they were counting every one of my meals, I would begin counting every one of their actions. And soon, a $5 decision of mine would shift the balance entirely. Not long after those late-night discoveries, I made a choice that seemed small at the time. On a quiet afternoon, I walked into a corner store and bought a lottery ticket for $5. I told myself it was nothing more than a rebellious act, a way of saying I still had some control over my life. I never imagined it would change everything. When the winning numbers were announced, I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes, stunned. The jackpot was $127 million, and after taxes, I would have access to $64,000. Most people might have packed a bag, left without a word, and started a brand new life. But sitting there in that parking lot, I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt something stronger resolve. I could have walked away, but I knew in my bones that leaving wouldn't heal what had already been broken. What I wanted wasn't just freedom. I wanted the truth out in the open. I wanted the world to see who my family really was when they thought I had nothing. For me, justice was worth more than any mansion or luxury car. So I kept quiet. I didn't touch the money. I didn't even hint at the truth. Instead, I chose patience, and I chose strategy. I began preparing for a battle they didn't even know had already started. The first step was to find someone who could help me uncover everything, someone who had seen stories like mine before. And that's when I reached out to Lucas Grant, an investigative journalist who would become my ally. When I first met Lucas Grant, I felt an unexpected relief. Here was someone who understood what I was describing not as a family spat, but as financial elder abuse. I remember sitting across from him in a small coffee shop downtown, my hands wrapped tightly around a mug just to stop them from shaking. I poured out my story, the late-night whispers I had overheard, the way Brooke counted every expense tied to me, and the way Mark avoided eye contact whenever the subject of money came up. Lucas listened carefully, and when I was done, he told me something that gave me both dread and hope. This wasn't just cruel behavior. It was criminal. With his help, my house quietly transformed into a stage for truth. During the day, while Mark and Brooke were at work and the kids were at school, Lucas's team installed small cameras disguised as everyday objects inside a ceramic bowl, tucked into picture frames, even hidden within a lamp. Sensitive microphones were placed where they could pick up murmurs through the thin walls. He explained the recordings would all feed into encrypted drives, and I remember thinking finally, their words wouldn't just wound me, they would expose themselves. At first, I felt nervous. I wondered if I was overreacting, or if I would catch nothing more than stress-induced complaints. But then, I began to hear it all again. This time knowing it was being documented, the casual talk about nursing homes, the subtle threats about my independence, the careful planning about how to make decisions for me. I often sat awake late at night, around 11:50 p.m., listening to the walls as if they themselves were witnesses. Every whisper they thought was private was becoming a thread in a net I was quietly weaving. And soon, I decided it was time to test how quickly they would show their true faces when even the hint of money appeared. The first test came sooner than I expected. With Lucas's guidance, I staged a phone call that sounded like it came from a sweepstakes office. My friend played the part, telling me I had supposedly won $25,000 and $1,000 a week for life. It was nothing but a performance. But the moment those words echoed through the house, the atmosphere shifted like a sudden storm. Just the day before, I had been treated as a burden, someone they wanted to move out to Pine Ridge Care as soon as possible. Yet suddenly, I was valuable again. Mark came home from work with a spring in his step, asking questions about what I might do with the winnings. Brooke softened her tone, almost syrupy, as if I had transformed overnight into a person worth keeping close. Inside, I kept up the act of confusion. I muttered that it might be a scam, that it sounded too good to be true. But watching their faces, I knew what they were really thinking, how quickly they could gain control of money that wasn't theirs. They spoke as though I was incapable of managing even $1,000 a week, suggesting I would need their guidance, their protection. The word protection felt like another cage. And then came the real gut punch. They hinted that if I stayed in the house, I should begin paying more, something like $1,500 a month, pulled straight from that imaginary windfall. In their minds, I wasn't a mother. I was a paycheck waiting to be harvested. I remember sitting there, nodding calmly, while my heart hardened. They thought the bait was money, but the truth was, the bait was them. And every greedy reaction was caught on camera, strengthening the case I was building. The next step would show just how far they were willing to go when they realized polite manipulation wasn't enough. It didn't take long for their politeness to fade. When I didn't jump at their suggestions, the pressure began to tighten around me. I could feel it at dinner, in the way conversations turned into subtle ultimatums. They spoke about my well-being as if it were a fragile object they alone could safeguard. The truth was clear, they were maneuvering to take control. One evening, Brooke leaned on the idea that older people often become confused, that sometimes families have to step in for their own good. I knew exactly where that was heading. She dressed the words in concern, but underneath was the same cold calculation I had heard months earlier in the hallway. I could almost hear the unspoken plan to take over my finances through conservatorship if I resisted. Then came the part that chilled me more than anything. I overheard her telling Mark that people who win the lottery often have accidents. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, letting the words sink in, my hands gripping the quilt just to stay steady. I had been waiting for that moment, the proof of threat, and though my heart raced, there was an odd satisfaction in knowing the cameras had captured it. Mark seemed less sure, almost hesitant, but he never stopped her. And in that silence, I understood something painful. His loyalty wasn't to me anymore. It was to the life they thought they could build with my money. I kept calm, outwardly gentle, because I knew the trap was closing not on me, but on them. Every new demand, every reckless whisper, was tightening the net I had been weaving. By the next morning, I no longer questioned whether I was ready. At 7:10 a.m., in that very kitchen, I would let the truth reveal itself. That morning at 7:10, I stood in the kitchen with a calmness I can only describe as earned. Mark blocked the doorway, his shoulders stiff as if daring me to resist. Brooke stationed herself near the counter, circling the conversation back to the same demand I needed to hand over control of my money. They cloaked it as protection, as family responsibility. But the truth was no longer hidden. I was expected to surrender everything to them. On the surface, I played my part confused, hesitant, maybe even overwhelmed. Inside, I was steady. I let them pile on their arguments, their conditions, their insistence that I wasn't capable of managing my own life. And then, in the silence that followed, I turned toward the decorative bowl on the counter and simply let the mask drop. I told them plainly that every word had been recorded, every late-night whisper, every manipulative plan. I had documented it all, legally, and nothing they had said could be taken back. For a moment, the room fell still. I watched the color drain from their faces as realization sank in. They weren't in control anymore. And then I added the truth I had kept hidden the longest. The sweepstakes call was just bait. I hadn't won $25,000 or $1,000 a week. I had won $127 million, and after taxes, $634,000 was sitting untouched in my account. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. They knew their scheme was finished, but this was only the beginning of the fallout. In the hours after that confrontation, the walls of our home no longer felt like a home at all. Mark retreated into silence, his head in his hands, while Brooke tried to spin excuses that even she didn't believe. By evening, the ripple effects had already begun. Mark's dealership cut ties with him almost immediately. Brooke's pharmaceutical company placed her on leave, pending what they called a review. Their social circle, once filled with neighbors and friends, grew quiet. People who used to smile at them now avoided eye contact. The hardest part was seeing the weight it placed on Noah and Lily. Noah was old enough to understand the gravity of it all. His anger came out sharp, not only at his parents, but at me too, for setting the trap. He asked why I hadn't tried to fix things quietly, as a family, and I had to look him in the eye and admit that I had tried many times, but love alone wasn't enough when someone treated you as a means to an end. Lily's pain was softer, but cut deeper. She asked if I was leaving forever. I held her and promised her that even if I moved, I wasn't disappearing from her life. Still, I knew nothing would ever be quite the same. That week, I moved into a hotel, giving myself space and giving them the chance to face what they had done. I began looking for a modest home nearby, one where my grandchildren could still visit, but before I could settle into a new chapter, the phone rang. The caller was from the Financial Crimes Unit, and her question was as direct as it was heavy. Did I want to press charges against my own son and his wife? When Detective Martinez from the Financial Crimes Unit asked if I wanted to press charges, my chest tightened. It is one thing to expose your own family in private. It is another to hand their names over to the justice system. For days, I turned the question over in my mind. But each time, I came back to the same truth if I stayed silent. Someone else's mother or grandmother might be the next victim. I agreed to move forward. Soon after, indictments came down. Mark was charged with conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse and making false statements to seek conservatorship. Brooke faced the same charges, along with an additional count for making threats against an elderly person. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. I testified for 2 long days, walking the jury through recordings that captured the erosion of trust in my own home. Mark's lawyer painted him as a man drowning in debt, desperate but not malicious. Brooke's attorney shifted the blame onto him, saying she had been dragged along, but the recordings told a different story, one of calculation, entitlement, and escalating threats. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts. Sentencing was set for 6 weeks later. As I left the courthouse, I didn't feel victorious. I only felt tired. but also certain that the truth was finally standing on its own legs. The public saw headlines about betrayal. But for me, this was never about drama. It was about survival, and about what needed to come next. After the trial, I knew I had to rebuild a life of my own. I found a modest 3-bedroom house just 10 minutes away from where I had lived with Mark and Brooke. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, and it gave Noah and Lily a place to visit that felt safe, steady, and full of warmth. The documentary Lucas had been filming aired once the legal proceedings were complete. It was titled, "The Grandmother Who Fought Back." Watching my story on television was surreal. People across the country saw not just my pain, but also the resilience that can exist in the most ordinary lives. The attention could have felt invasive, but instead, it sparked something important: conversations about how families treat their elders. That was the seed of the Parker Elder Justice Fund. Using a portion of my lottery winnings, I created a nonprofit to provide legal aid, safe housing, and advocacy for seniors facing abuse or financial control. In the very first year, we helped 89 families. Over time, we expanded to 12 states, successfully challenged 73 fraudulent conservatorships, and recovered over $8,000 in stolen assets. For me, the true reward wasn't in numbers or headlines. It was in the quiet dignity restored to people who had been silenced. It was in showing them and myself that age doesn't mean weakness, and that respect is not optional. As I settled into this new chapter, one final truth kept me grounded. Healing isn't about forgetting what was done to you. It's about choosing what you'll do next. Looking back, I never wanted to become a public story. I simply wanted peace, respect, and a place to grieve my husband without feeling like a burden. But life had other plans. What began as a quiet act of survival grew into something larger than me. I've learned that family is not defined by blood alone. Sometimes the very people who share your last name are the ones who wound you the most. And sometimes, strangers, lawyers, advocates, kind neighbors step in and become the family you truly need. That realization was painful, but also freeing. It gave me permission to draw boundaries and to expect dignity, no matter my age. Noah and Lily taught me another lesson. Even in broken families, love can survive. They visit often, and I see in them a determination to live differently than their parents. Noah studies business now, determined not to repeat Mark's mistakes. Lily spends weekends volunteering at the foundation, learning that protecting others is one of the greatest forms of strength. Their resilience gives me hope that cycles of greed and neglect can be broken. At 72, I discovered I was worth fighting for. And now, I spend my days helping other seniors discover the same. Winning the lottery gave me money, but standing up for myself gave me something greater: purpose. If you've ever felt overlooked or undervalued, I want you to hear this. Your voice matters. Share your story, even if it trembles. Someone out there needs to know they are not alone. If my journey has touched you, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who needs strength today, and leave a comment with your own experience. Together, we can remind the world that dignity doesn't fade with age.